Good morning, everybody. I guess it's still morning. It's lunchtime. Why are you guys still here? So how many people have ever worked with a third-party reseller, integrator, that sort of thing? Couple hands. Everybody's like, do I have to raise my hand? All right, keep your hand up if you enjoyed the experience. Was it fun? No? Adversarial, confrontational, butting heads, right? Like, it's frustrating that those situations happen, and my goal today is to hopefully address that and give you some tips and tricks on how to make that be a little bit better next time. Because it doesn't have to be that way. What ends up happening is miscommunications, misunderstandings, some ignorance, and then you have different goals and motivations that are cause conflicts. And so I just kind of want to give you a little bit of perspective on that. Before I do, let me tell you a quick story. I had a reseller come up to me and said, security is stupid, compliance is dumb, it's not worth the money, I'm not going to deal with this. And I looked at him, and of course I said, au contraire. We're in Canada. I was told we have to have French in the presentation. That's all I got. Sorry. I said, tell me your story. What's going on? And it turns out this guy had really worked hard in the early 2000s, right? He was on top of it with all the card brand standards. And then as PCI come up, he's like, we're going to do the right thing. And he built an installation process that was good. And he used only services and solutions and technologies that could be secured. And he was doing it right. And then he had a merchant get breached anyway. And the PFI came in and said, ultimately, the root cause was the router was misconfigured. He pointed at the reseller, said it's all their fault, destroyed that relationship, lots of contention, lots of problems. Turned out, after all of this happened, what ended up happening was the owner of this little restaurant had their nephew come in and make a change to the firewall so that they could install some other little third-party, phone system, camera system, something like that. And that's ultimately what caused the breach. But by that point, by the time they figured that out, that relationship was destroyed. The customer was lost. Generations of relationship was gone there. And so this reseller made the decision, this is not worth my time. I do not care. I'm not going to deal with it. That compliance, that requirement, that's between the council, the card brands, the processor, the acquirer, the merchant. I don't care. Everybody else can take care of it. I'm staying out of it. And we've got a lot of history of those types of situations. And so hopefully, like I said, today I want to give you some tips and tricks on how to avoid that. I'm a principal security consultant for a company called Secure Ideas. We do penetration testing and adversarial testing consulting. We've worked with lots and lots of companies. I've probably been involved in 1,000 penetration tests over the last 15 years. But that's not really what makes my opinion valuable. Prior to that, I worked for almost a decade for a small point-of-sale reseller. In the early 2000s, as PCI was first becoming a thing, and nobody could spell DSS, we were trying to figure out, what do we do here? There was nobody to ask. We couldn't afford to go pay $200, $300 an hour for a consultant to say, here's what you need to do. And so we were really struggling to figure it out. Now, fast forward 20 years, I get the opportunity to work with an organization called the RSPA, Retail Solutions Providers Association. I'll tell you a little bit more about them in a second. But I get to be a member benefit to all of the RSPA members, the resellers and vendors and anyone else, and help them understand, here's what you need to do. I kind of consider myself a little bit of a Rosetta Stone between, hey, here's what the enterprise folks already know, here's what the council knows, and here's how we talk about things at this level, and then here's what these people understand, and trying to convey that knowledge back and forth. So who is the RSPA? They are the oldest, largest association of resellers, integrators, vendors, payment applications, all of those folks involved in the point-of-sale ecosystem. They've been around for over 60 years. They meet several times a year. They do a really good job of empowering resellers and empowering those relationships, helping vendors to provide solutions that can be installed correctly and securely and all that kind of stuff. They also have services like a legal service where you can call a lawyer if you're a member and you can get free advice, and a security service. As a consultant, I'm kind of sort of like on retainer, so any of their members can call me. They're not the small reseller in, say, Cincinnati. He's not going to call my company and pay $300 an hour to get consulting, but as an RSPA member, he can get free consulting. And so that's kind of where my role is and why I'm kind of in a unique position in the industry to be able to help with some of this kind of stuff. So let's talk a little bit about POS resellers. What are they? Why do they matter? What's going on there? According to the Small Business Administration, there are over 6 million small businesses in the US. They consider that less than 500 employees. Now, I don't know stats outside the US, but I think it's probably fairly similar. That represents like 99.9% of businesses. That is the vast majority of the payment industry. And almost every single one of them, I would wager, does not feel like they are part of this community. I get told all the time that they have no representation, they don't know what's going on, they feel left out. And honestly, they feel like there's this us versus them mentality. And I don't think that's intentional. Nobody's created that on purpose, but it's happened, right? And so POS resellers are in this unique position of how do we help these small merchants? How do we provide them the things that we need? We want to do things right, but they're in a challenging role. They serve, to a large aspect, as the trusted advisor. If you're a small business, if you have 100 or less employees, you probably don't have much IT staff, maybe an IT guy, right? You've all probably worked with a company at some point that has an IT person who really he used to be an accountant, but he knows how to use Excel, so he's now the IT person, right? They don't have security people, let alone compliance or anything like that. That reseller, that integrator, they serve that middle ground of being that trusted advisor and say, hey, here's what you really have to worry about, here's what you need to do, here's what you don't need to do, that sort of thing. They also tend to serve niche markets. I'll tell you a little story later. I've got a client that this reseller, they work with a very large makeup chain, very level 1 merchant. They've got their own stores. They do all this kind of stuff. But they also go to trade shows. And their point of sale system, their solution doesn't work well setting up this 3-day point of sale system and then tearing it down and taking it to the next place and all that. So they work with a reseller who had a solution. They bring it in to do this. So very weird little niche markets that don't quite fit into everything else. That's where resellers often play in there. Cannabis has been a big one in the US in the last couple of years. The cannabis market has just gone huge, and resellers are finding ways to serve that market in ways that otherwise aren't available. And then they often serve as the front line for small businesses. I'm sorry, the front line of defense, the front line of security. Are there any acquirers in here? Anybody work for an acquirer? A couple of hands? Awesome. If you are not working with resellers, you need to be, because they have those relationships with the small merchants. They are able to communicate. They are able to be that middleman of taking that information and making sure it gets to those small merchants. I guarantee your salespeople are reaching out to them. Your salespeople are using resellers to be able to do that sales process. The security and compliance folks need to be using them as well, doing things like webinars and events and activities, because otherwise small merchants are not getting a lot of the information that they should be getting. Oh, I had a quick note, I'll go back there. The QIR program, that could be another hour-long presentation. The QIR program ultimately was designed, or is designed, to mitigate some of the risk associated in this area. There's some complexity there. It's had some successes, some failures over the years. The current system is working fairly well, but participation from my perspective doesn't seem like it's great. Like I said, that could be a much longer, another presentation. So from the reseller perspective, why care about POS? Or why care about the PCI DSS? What do they get out of it? Cost, hassle, frustrations? They don't make any money out of it, right? Like there's always the argument like, well, you can sell security services, you can sell consulting, you can help people fill out their SAQ, and you can provide managed security services. And there are some people that do well in that market, but for the majority of resellers, it's just a hassle. It's an extra burden that they don't want to deal with. Now, they still have good intentions. People want to be secure. They want to take care of stuff. Especially, I talked a lot about that trusted advisor relationship between resellers and merchants. It's almost like a family thing, right? They care about their clients. They want to take care of them. They want to be secure. But the vast majority of their customers don't care. They're not willing to pay extra. They're not willing to go through the hoops and whatnot. Where most resellers get involved with our industry is when they, one, have a large merchant that all of a sudden they have to, right? They have a level 1 merchant and now they have to deal with this. There's an old sales maxim talked about the idea of surviving on rabbits while you're hunting for elephants, right? And that's the way most small companies like that work. Like they have 1 or 2 really big clients that, big sale, it's a great thing. They got that relationship and they maintain that. But while the vast majority of their clients are much smaller. The other significant driver is when a client gets compromised, and now they're not dealing with a QSA, they're dealing with a PFI, and they have to go through that whole process. That, in my experience, that tends to be a more adversarial thing, just by necessity. Nobody likes it when there's a compromise. It's a hassle. Everybody's scared. What's this going to do? The merchant's thinking I'm going to go out of business. Who's pointing fingers at who? There's all kinds of stuff there. Or sometimes when the processor or acquirer requires it. At the RSPA, we continue to push security. The fact that they pay me as a member benefit to work with these resellers, it's an important thing, and we're making progress. Things are getting better. It's a lot better than it was 10 years ago, but there's a lot of room for improvement there as well. So I had a client one time, a small grocery store chain. He said, you know what? I don't care about security. I don't care about the credit cards. I sell meat and potatoes. Fix the system so I can sell meat and potatoes. I don't care what you have to do, just make it work. It was a contentious situation, but that resonated with me. That's probably been almost 15 years ago now. It made me realize that, yes, everybody wants to be secure, right? We all want to take care of our stuff. When you start out as a small business, you don't start out and say, hey, I'm going to be the most secure whatever, right? Like, that's not where you start. You say, I'm going to provide this service better than anyone else. I'm going to do this. I'm going to make some money. I'm going to set something aside for my family. Lots of people have motivations. Security and compliance and HR and accounting, all that stuff comes after the fact. We have to deal with that as part of a business. But for a small business, dealing with that kind of stuff is a much larger, relatively speaking, percentage of hassle, right? Larger businesses, enterprise, we have whole departments dedicated to this, and we just deal with it as a cost of business. We're used to it. Smaller merchants, that's not the case. What ends up happening is when you're at that level, and honestly, you're just trying to stay in business. You're trying to make ends meet. You're trying to make payroll. You're not reading requirements, right? You're not. You don't care about technicalities or compensating controls or whatever. The goal is do what I have to do so that I can keep doing my thing and go home at the end of the day. Ultimately, they want to be empowered to do their job. That's our role. That's our responsibility, is to empower those merchants to be able to do their job. So there's some challenges from a reseller perspective. These are things for you to keep in mind the next time that you sit across the table or on a conference call with a reseller. These are some of the things they're dealing with. First off, PCI insecurity rarely becomes a significant concern. It's not a huge thing for them, in large part, and this is a win for the PCI community. Over the last 20 years, technology has gotten much better. All of the different requirements and compliance certification programs and all this, they have driven better technology, and that has trickled down into the ecosystem, and that's a really good thing. But most small merchants, they don't think anything will ever happen to them, right? They don't know anybody who's been compromised. They don't know what's going on. They think it's just a waste of time. They also feel like these hassles are unnecessarily burdensome, right? I don't know how many times I've heard somebody say, this content filtering thing that you forced on me, this is stupid. I can't access my fantasy football stuff now. I need you to go turn this off. They see, hey, I bought this computer. No, you didn't buy a computer, you bought a point of sale system. But they don't see that. They see, I have this computer, it's in my manager's office. The office is like this big. There's barely room for the computer. I don't have room for another system. Let's just make this computer do it. And when we try to tell them, well, but you didn't pay extra for this router that can do segmentation and we do this, so this is all we can have, they don't get it. It's just a hassle. And they want you to fix it. Or updates. Oh my gosh. From a reseller's perspective, dealing with updates is the worst. Because the merchant says, hey, my system's working great, everything is fine, it's going, and then you installed this update, and now stuff are broke. Yeah. Side joke, we homeschool our kids, and every time somebody makes fun of me for misspeaking, I'm like, hey, I was public schooled, right? That's what it is. But these are the challenges that small merchants deal with. A lot of times, too, they feel like, hey, you're just trying to get more money off the table, right? I'm barely making ends meet. You're just trying to make a little bit more cash off the deal. So some more challenges from the reseller perspective. How do you train a merchant that doesn't want to be involved in security? It's hard. We used to have a training manual where we went through and we would require people to sign off on this and this and this. And they would just flip to the back of the book, sign it, whatever. They don't care. Responsibility matrices, the responsibility matrix is a great idea. If you haven't seen that, just Google PCI responsibility matrix. Akamai's got a great one that you can find. It's basically just a list of who's responsible for what. Do you hand off responsibility for controls knowing they won't do it? Or do you help them maintain things and therefore take on some of the liability? right? This is a hassle for resellers. What do you do in that situation? Do you refuse to sell solutions that can't be fully compliant and likely go out of business because your competitors are going to sell it, right? When you're dealing at a $10,000 sale and you say, hey, you've got to buy this commercial grade router that's going to cost $500, $600, and your competitor's selling a $50 consumer router instead, it's a firewall because it has NAT, right? Like this is a challenge. What do you do? They want to do the right thing, but it's difficult. And what it almost always comes down to is that security trumps compliance, right? As much as we preach about PCI DSS and being compliant and do all these things, security ultimately is the end goal, because if they do things right, if they make it secure, quite honestly, they'll not have to deal with any of us in this room. And I guess maybe that's a fortunate thing. I don't know. So just for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over some of this. Basically, I've talked about where they interact with large merchants as well. We've seen this, niche situations, whatnot. This ends up happening. This is where we all get involved. But really, the key that I want to get to, the things for you to think about when you're dealing with an integrator, reseller, whatnot, be patient and recognize they don't know all the things you know. They're not going to understand the acronyms you throw at them. I get phone calls and they say, hey, they said I have to fill out a SAC or a ROC or a SOC or something, I don't know. Do I really have to do all this? What's the minimum I have to do? Recognize that there's some education that needs to happen there, and be patient about that. I talk about, like with my consultants, I tell them to have a heart of a teacher, right? Go into things recognizing I want to leave this situation better than when I got there. Make sure they understand what you're asking for, because most of the time they won't. They probably have not read all the requirements. If they have, maybe it was version 3.1, right? And that was 10 years ago. They definitely don't know what's going on in DSS4 and that sort of thing. So make sure, hey, this is going to take a little bit of time, but let's talk about it. Avoid polarizing language. It's so easy to start pointing fingers and just rebuild this us versus them mentality. So avoid that kind of stuff. I always tell people to use inclusive language. We're part of a team. How do we get this done? How do we accomplish these objectives, right? We're all here together to get this stuff done, because ultimately that's our goal. And look for common goals in that. That's kind of part of it. Take time to understand the responsibilities and roles of each party. This is challenging because I guarantee you the merchant won't know. And so dealing with that of the merchant thinks, well, my reseller's doing this, and the reseller's saying, no, remember you signed off on this and we told you that we're not going to do that, you have to do this. And then the merchant has this, glassy-eyed, like, I don't know. Understand that process. And kind of an extra aside, if you've never done this, anytime that you're on a call or in a meeting with a merchant and a reseller, look for an opportunity afterwards to interact with the reseller directly. I've had QSAs reach out to me, because often I will get pulled into this after the fact when there's already some contention going on, and I'll get pulled in to kind of help, be the interpreter. And if I can interact with the QSA directly and say, look, here's the situation. This merchant's telling you one thing. The reseller doesn't want to contradict them because they're their client, right? They're family, and if they tell you that they're lying in front of them, that causes problems. But how do we get around this? So look for those opportunities where you can to kind of do an end around. Again, for acquirers, resellers should be huge for your education efforts. And then remember that the resellers really do care. I've probably said multiple times here, they don't care, they don't care, they don't care. That's not really true. They do care, because they care about their clients. They want things to be secure. Their reputation is on the line, but there's that but. They have other competing priorities and motivations and expectations and all that. So really strive to understand kind of what some of those things are. I've got like a minute left. With any questions? Awesome. Well, thank you guys. I will hang out over here for a little bit. If you do have questions, I'd love to chat with you. Otherwise, there's one more session, right? You can't run to lunch? All right. Stay around for the next one.